Hello, everybody. This is Gene here from Blackchair. Good afternoon. Good morning. Hope everybody's doing well. Welcome to my socially distanced garden office that I have been camped out in since February. I'm sure that everybody's growing a little wary of it all, but fortunately, we're here together virtually, and I hope that this session today you're going to find of useful information on. So, as I said, I'm Gene. I work for Blackchair, and today I'm going to be talking to you for probably about 30 or 40 minutes about some interesting innovations that we're discovering and working on in the UC and CX industry, and hopefully you'll find it of use as well. I want to try to keep the session as interactive as possible. So if you have any questions, you can just go to the Q&A section and fire those questions in while I'm talking to you here today. And I have a little screen over here in my corner, which I can look at and then, answer questions on the fly to kind of, make it a little bit more interactive. Hate monologuing. Looks like I'm going to be doing that for the next 30 odd minutes or so, but there you go. Hopefully we'll be able to find, some interesting questions with the audience. If you want just a little bit of housekeeping, I've just turned on the screen, so you should be able to see my slides now. You'll also see my image in the corner, but if you put your mouse over it, you should be able to move that video image to a different corner of the screen. So feel free to do that during the presentation today. What we're going to be talking about are two main things. The first one, we're going to talk about UC and CX automation in the industry and what we're defining that as, and our interesting take on it, as it were. We call it abstracting the user interface, and we're going to talk about the scenarios, what that means, why you would do it, what's driving that from in this day and age, and is it right for you? Because it might not be right for everybody. But we're going to talk about the scenarios on how that can be of use to a business moving forward in the scenarios. The second thing we're going to be talking about is UC and CX cleansing. And we're going to talk about what the heck that actually is. And as before, we're going to talk about why you might need it. What are the business scenarios you're facing that would drive you to do that sort of activity, and what the results look like. So we're going to show you a case study of a customer who recently went through this exercise and the discoveries that they found by doing this. And I'll set the scene a little bit when we talk about that as well. And as I said before, at any time, if you want to ask any questions, there's a Q&A option on the screen for you to just drop in your question, and I'll answer it. So, automation in the contact center in UC and CX space. What exactly is it? What are we honestly talking about here in terms of abstracting the front end? The simplest way I can describe it is the ability to standardize the tools that a business would use on a day-to-day basis to control the technology stack or the UC and CX solution underneath. It separates the business from the dependency of using the proprietary software that the manufacturers would issue to you. Now, this is going to become important in a minute or two as I go through this scenario. And what it also does is it could help join together a range of different UC and CX platforms so that one standard user interface for your business can use the same capability and the same tools to be able to drive behavior on the call center on the ground without having to go into the individual proprietary or the manufacturer's software applications. That's quite important here because what we find in the industry is that there are a lot of businesses out there that want to give more control to their call centers, in the form of giving them more control and access over these user interfaces. But the user interfaces themselves are very technical. They're very engineering based. They're not necessarily designed to make it really, really simple for a call center manager or a supervisor who just needs to move 15 agents from A to B skill, or to change the opening hours because there's been an unusual demand today, and I want to move those hours from 7 p.m. and move it to 10 p.m. tonight. Those sorts of things. And by doing that, using the standard tools that are on the platform that the manufacturers tend to provide, it tends to be a little bit awkward. Maybe the people weren't necessarily trained to do that, or it might be too time consuming, and or the business might prevent the call center from being that agile at all. And that we have seen as well in the industry. So there's a range of reasons why you might want to do this. But there's other areas that are driving this need and this desire to be able to create this standardized front end to your business. The one that I'm finding very interesting is the time between UC and CX purchases, like strategic purchases in a business, is getting shorter. I remember a time when you would buy what we call a PBX, and it would be like a 20-year investment, 25-year investment, and you would use the software that's running underneath it and the call center capability, and that would run the business for a good long period of time. But nowadays, with the emergence of all of these other contact center solutions providers, be it cloud or premise, contracts are coming in at 3 years or 5 years before they have to get renewed. And the interesting twist as well is that they're no longer treated as capital purchases. And that changes the mindset in a business about what they want to do with these services moving forward. When it was a CapEx purchase and you were spending $10 million on it, you had to depreciate that over time. So you needed to make sure you had that asset sweated out for as long as possible. But in a more OpEx world, there's no assets to depreciate, and therefore there's a potential desire or a freeness, I suppose, a freedom to be able to look at the market more frequently than you would need to. More and on top of that, the emergence of all of these new other players in the UC and CX space is driving the desire to move on to these new systems. And so what we're finding is that there's lots of companies in the market, in the industry, that are looking to put a toe in the water for a portion of their contact center to see what it's like and how it's performing. And so that's changing the contracts lengths, and that's churning it a little bit more in the market. So it's a very interesting, time to be in this space. But then again, you have to also now start thinking about the scenarios that your business is facing when there are new players coming into your contact center, and you have to also be sympathetic to the business and how much time it takes them to adapt to these, and whether or not the functionality is going to be similar, and how much of an impact is that going to create. So what I've done on the next slide is I've presented a couple of scenarios on how abstracting the front end and normalizing it for your business users can help overcome some issues that you might be facing in the future. So you can see on my screen today, on the screen here, a scenario where you have, the carrier network and the internet. You'll have your CX solution sitting connected to those environments. And then from here, you'll have the proprietary manufacturer's software, whether that's web-based or thick clients sitting on desktops, doesn't really matter. But they are built by the manufacturer for the manufacturer based on the training the manufacturer provides. So it's very, very regimented into that space. The technical users will be trained up to know what they need to do with it, but so will the business users. And so there's going to be an important time to make sure that those people are completely au fait and up to speed with how to use this particular software for different purchases. Adoption and take-up ramps will constantly need to be in place for new starters coming into the organization. And this is standard. This happens all the time anyway. But there is also an inherent risk of giving this, what would be pretty powerful software, to the business users, of them making the odd mistake or two, especially if you haven't really done your homework in terms of how to secure that software to the business users. One false move or one mistake changing something that they shouldn't could cause a cascade of effects later on down the line that could, in the worst case scenario, stop your call center from running. So there is an inherent risk of giving business users the manufacturer user interface software to be able to drive change inside the business. But then also, that's great. You'll say, no problem, I won't give it to them. That's all right too. But now what you'll have is tons and tons of MADC requests coming in your way for things that they may need to do, not super frequently, but on a regular basis to be able to react to changing demand in the market for them. Opening and closing hours is a good example of that. Some companies may need to do that, especially in the world of COVID, where they may want to expand their operational hours because they may have fewer people working from home. Some of them might be on furlough. And so how do you manage that? So that would be a scenario where you would have to go through an MADC process, get somebody to go in and manually do that work and make those changes and do that activity. And depending on your size and scale and complexity and the number of users you have in your environment, that could mount up to quite a lot of work. With every single time somebody touching a keyboard, you're introducing risk. Now, what we're proposing here is putting a software layer that sits in front of the UCCX solutions. It talks natively to those solutions using their industry-approved APIs, so there's no risk of there being any issues there. But what the user sees is very simple front ends to do particular tasks that have been approved by the technical users and the business users to allow them to adapt to their particular needs. And it's been built in conjunction with the business users. So they have a say in how they want their user interfaces to look. And they are essentially simple web pages. You build straightforward web pages to maybe add and delete agents, modify skills, change skill levels, move agents from A to B, reset skills to a certain setting at night, opening and close hour changes, changes to IVR announcement, comfort message changes, all of those things that would a contact center would love to be able to manipulate and control on a regular basis. You can do inside this particular type of design. It's fully customized to protect the business as well from scenarios that we just talked about earlier. Somebody accidentally making a change and causing a disruption to the business is not possible when you look at this model here, because they can only see and only touch the things that they are allowed to. And there's a number of levels of control that prevent them from doing anything other than that. We call it the walled garden effect. It means that they can do pretty much whatever they want within this particular walled garden, and they can't venture, outside of the walled garden to do anything else. And so there's a really good level of comfort from the technical operations people when you have this particular scenario. Risky changes can also be managed. The interesting twist here is that the technical user can use the same tools to be able to conduct certain activities of their own that they may find particularly risky. So that's one scenario that I think is useful to understand. But there's also another twist here, and that is now if you needed to replace the technology underneath, guess what? The user interface from the business doesn't change. It's exactly the same UI that they saw before. It does pretty much all of the same things that they did before: adding and deleting agents, resetting skills, putting on a comfort message, changing the operating hours, etc., etc., etc. So there's no disruption now to the line of business users inside your organization. The only thing that changes is the technology that drives the behavior underneath and the interface. And that's a very powerful story for certain individuals, especially for big call centers where, it's not an insignificant number to do a large amount of training and education of the users on a new technology. So there is something to consider. It is something to look at and to weigh up if you are looking to go down that route. Now let's multiply the problem. Now you've got two technologies that are driving your call center. And this is not unusual in the industry. I mean, we're finding it all the time, especially with the new, CCaaS providers and other vendors. You'll have big businesses that will have a multitude of different technologies underneath driving different pockets of call centers all around their all around their operation. And what this also means is that there needs to be training for those individual manufacturers' recommended software packages for those different teams and operations and departments. So once again, the training costs go up. All the problems that we were talking about earlier regarding take-up and adoption and risk of mistakes, etc., are still introduced, but doubled. So we need to find a way to be able to resolve that. And the way we do that is, once again, by abstracting the front end for them and allowing the automation capability of the software to manipulate both environments to be able to achieve a particular objective. And in some scenarios, you may need to do that. You may have a call center front end, but a call delivery, which is a completely different PBX system driving information underneath. And both things need to be changed or modified to be able to add a new agent or change a particular skill or move a DN around or things like that. So the abstracting capability allows you to orchestrate a sequence of changes across both technology platforms to accommodate the need. And as I said before, the technical users can also leverage this capability to do all sorts of funky things. One of the great use cases here is around provisioning agents across these different systems. So if you ever needed to do that, that's possible inside these scenarios. Of course, this isn't for everyone. I think that's pretty common knowledge. So there's a sequence of questions that you need to start asking yourself, whether or not this is something that's useful to you. The very first one is the size of your business. How many zeros do you have at the end of your number of call center agents inside your estate? Because the more zeros you have, I would argue that you probably are a good candidate for this sort of situation. The number of UC and CX systems in your estate is another one. Think of your attitude towards risk as well. So if you are risk averse in terms of making sure that people don't make those mistakes, or you may have been burned already by scenarios such as the ones we've already described, you may want to consider something that can help you in this space. There's also the question around if you are planning a migration to a new CX platform. It might be of benefit to be able to hive off the workload relevant to making those changes on the front end and start that work, creating an abstracted front end, and then that releases you in a way from worrying about having to retrain agents again on a new platform. We find that, and this is talking to the last bullet, if you are in the managed service space or you work with companies that are in the managed service space, this could be particularly useful for you because it means that you can create really custom client-facing front ends to allow them to manipulate the changes that you want them to make in your branding. And all that happens in the background is our software manipulating and running the automation that the client is asking for. So think about that if that is something that you're, if you're in the market of doing those sorts of things. So your takeaways at this point. Well, the first question is, think about how many change requests are coming in from your contact center. How many can they do today on their own? How many can they do where it requires a request from operations or from technical to be able to fulfill? There might be activities where you would have deemed it being too risky for them to do themselves, but they would want to have inside your operation. And I bring up an example again around managed service providers. They would be very wary of giving a lot of control over to their client because what they're trying to avoid is downtime or outages or failures of service because that could impact their wallet. It could be a situation where a client makes a change, brings down half the system, and then at the quarterly review, they're beating the supplier over their head for a mistake they happen to make. And I've seen this happen. So we need to be mindful about that. And that scenario can be emulated inside a business as well, where a business manager, a call center manager could beat the technical guys overhead saying, hey, our guys were able to make this change and we shouldn't be able to have to do that, blah, blah, blah. And it all gets a little bit unpleasant. So think about those sorts of scenarios and whether they're relevant in your operation. Are you looking to enhance or replace or amend your UCCX technology underneath your business over the next 1 to 2 years? even if it's something that you're going to put a toe in the water on. I mean, I have out here in the UK, if you hadn't guessed, I live here in the United Kingdom, although I am American. I have a passport to prove it. My accent doesn't prove it, though, sadly. But I have a customer here in the UK that is putting a toe in the water in a CCaaS option, and they're using it for some of their more basic call center functions. So none of the technical or complex requests or queries, just some of the basic activity. And so, something having like this in the front end could help them. If you have a hybrid setup today, this is something that you should consider looking at. So if you answered yes to any of these questions or the ones that I showed on the previous slide, it might be worth exploring how this might help in your organization. It's an interesting subject that I think is going to become more and more relevant as the market widens and deepens in terms of the players. It's a really ferocious market at the moment, and there's lots of bargains to be had. But what you want to make sure of is that you don't harm your run rate business by forcing your contact center management to constantly change the way they need to work in order to fulfill the client requirement, because that would just be bad news, not just for your business but for your customers. So consider those sorts of things when you're looking at this in the future. Right, I haven't seen any questions on the Q&A, so I'll just carry on. The next thing we're going to talk about is washing down your UC and CX solution. Well, okay, guys, I apologize. This is my very feeble attempt at humor halfway through the presentation. And clearly, it wasn't that great, but I thought I'd give it a go. Love me or leave me. So what are we really talking about here when it comes to UC and CX cleansing? Well, what we're defining it as at Blackchair is the act of analysis and identifying the required configuration design in a UC and CX platform. Removing the sludge is another way of, I suppose, we can define it. The activities are involving the gathering of your entire configuration record from front to end, and understanding the business processes as well that support that configuration design, and analyzing it for what is actually being used in there. We look at change activity, we look at creations, deletions, modifications, but we're also looking at what is flowing through those particular configurations. What are the business processes that are driving it and holding it in place, and bringing all of that information together to give the customer a picture of what is essential in terms of configuration. The importance of this is going to become relevant in a few moments. But once you have that information there, it gives the business the power and the confidence to be able to go and conduct further analysis and prune the configuration, reshape the way the new environment needs to look in order to achieve certain business objectives. Some of these contact centers and technologies might have been in place for 15 years. And over those 15 years, your business will have changed in terms of the way you work, the way you communicate, the dynamism, the different functions and capabilities, new services you offer. There could be acquisitions. You could have acquired another company. And I know a lot of those that happen as well, where you would bring on their technology and plug it into yours. And now you have this great big mishmash of configuration that's completely inconsistent, yet needs to be looked after, because there will absolutely be inconsistencies and inefficiencies that are not only costing you time, but are costing you money. Okay? Why is this important in your operation? Well, clearly the first one is by having a much smaller and scaled down configuration design, it will help you avoid making mistakes. And I see this all the time in the call center, where our analysis will pull up that, hey, you had 20% of your contact center on a skill that didn't technically exist or wasn't plugged into anything. And they would go, what? That's crazy. You're talking out of your backside. I don't know what you're talking about. And then we show them the proof. We show them, look, Mary Jane and Peter Jones and this, that, and da-da-da was on this skill setting. And they look at it and go, oh, yeah, the call center manager must have made a mistake. They should have put the one with the capital A, not the lowercase a in the skill group. And we really should train our people to do that. And that is common because the configuration is so old and antiquated and still resides in there. And no one is nobody's confident enough to be able to start pruning this stuff out, to be able to manage it. It will also help to improve the performance of the systems by simply having a much smaller design. There's quite a lot of what we call low-hanging fruit opportunities by conducting this analysis. Certain business processes come to light when you conduct this sort of analysis, and it enables the business to go and examine those particular processes that might not be very relevant anymore. Our CEO, Jason, shared a story with me the other day about a customer where they were creating skills for agents based on the date the contract they signed came into. So there was a skill group that every agent of a particular date that they entered the business was assigned to. Very strange. But once again, it was about asking those questions of why are you doing that? Is there a better way of doing those sorts of things? The more powerful business benefit is this one right here. By being able to conduct the analysis of what is used in your business and what is not, it gives you an opportunity to reconsider the software levels that you are paying for, either per month as an OpEx purchase, or per annum as an annual maintenance fee, to be able to review and possibly reduce over time. So that's where the tangibles start to come into play. It can also help you drive down carrier costs as well, which we're going to show you in a second. But also, quite critically, if you are looking to do migration work, if you're looking to move on to a different technology and you're more interested in creating a consistency of experience that you've built up over the years in the new platform, and you're looking at this mainly as a cost reduction exercise, then having a UCCX cleansing activity could be very, very useful. It also, of course, is very useful if you're looking to build on what your design and configuration is as well. It gives the any sort of contact center provider that's looking to sell into a customer the capability of understanding very quickly where they should be focusing their energies, so that they can get the time to value quicker than anybody else in the market. Now, I'm going to show you some scenarios here. This is a case study that we've done recently with a customer, where we had our software deployed and this activity conducted inside their business. We installed it in a couple of days, and we let the software run for about 2 weeks before we began the analysis on this. And we found some very interesting results on this activity. One of them in particular was that 9% of all of the routing design in this particular solution was taking 80% of the traffic. And that's quite a useful metric, because it also, we look at that and comparing how many other vectors they existed in that market, in that system, and we began to realize, oh my goodness, you know, there's quite a lot of routing design in there that isn't really being used in the organization. So we need to, before we begin any activity of moving this information and redesigning this information away from, you know, legacy onto your target solution, what do we need to focus our energies on? So here's some other interesting metrics that came out of this this particular engagement. Vectors in an Avaya world, for everybody's information, is kind of the routing logic. It tells us what to do with calls, look at the conditions, and then send it to the appropriate agents and teams. Well, of the 683 this customer had, nearly 300 of them weren't even used at all and hadn't been used in quite some time. No calls went through them. They haven't been touched or modified over a period of time. And so that indicates very early on that we can already start ignoring or basically parking these particular designs and focusing on the ones where there was a lot of traffic or there was a lot of activity put through them. The same thing with the DNs. You know, 3,800 of them took no calls whatsoever all that particular time. Interestingly enough, 20 of them took nearly over 300,000 calls. So what this tells the business straight away is, oh my goodness, I might be paying for numbers coming into my organization where there's no call traffic coming in. It gives me the confidence to go back to my carrier and start looking very carefully at where I might be able to reduce costs there. Another interesting area of information is around skills. Once again, we're looking at the ability to see which skills are relevant in the organization, which ones are not. And as we have identified, and what's becoming more and more common with this particular client, the lion's share of them simply don't have anything connected to them. And so we can quite confidently go back in and start looking at how we can tighten up the design and simplify it, but still support the business processes that it needs to run on, still being able to deliver the business outcomes that they're looking to do. And that's the secret sauce here, by being able to conduct this cleansing activity, being able to understand what's going on empirically, with information being provided from the different systems in question, as well as the customers. The client in question will have their own input, of course, but it just means that the cloud service provider in this particular instance starts from a position of very powerful knowledge to be able to accelerate their ability through the overall project. So what are the results? Well, the customer now can go and talk to the carrier about pruning down their footprint. That's money they didn't really expect out of this particular project. The cloud provider can truly focus on what's important. They know the DNs that are coming in that are critical. They know the vectors. They know the skills. They've already now have enough knowledge to be able to say, right, I can now begin without starting from scratch. And it gives me, I can start at like 50 meters ahead of a 100-meter sprint, which is fantastic. It shortens the time to value. The client reckoned that they saved about 30% in discovery time on that phase. And we're expecting a 15% reduction overall in the project delivery time based on this one assignment. So it's really powerful. And the icing on the cake is that the business can now go back to their WFM system, their dialer, their call recorder, and rationalize each one of those in succession based upon the knowledge that they've gathered from the ACD and the CX systems. So it's a really powerful story. It delivers a lot of benefit to an organization, whether you are in the middle of conducting a configuration change or doing a change to the PBX or not. You might have a 25-year-old Avaya ACD. You will be a really good candidate for this sort of thing. So those are your takeaways. How old is the solution? Have you ever conducted this sort of assignment before in your business? How complex are the contact centers inside your space today? How many different business units do you have running different things? How many processes are being driven underneath this the solutions that you have? Have you done a license review recently? Is another critical one. Because if you haven't, this is going to be a really useful tool to support the arguments to your suppliers that you don't need this money licenses, because you've run analysis on this information and you're only using 80% of it. So you want 20% reduction on X, Y, Z without any impact to your business performance. Now, if you're a UC and CX solutions provider, this is very important in a slightly different way. This helps you gain competitive advantage. This helps you gain confidence in your story with the customer. This helps you shorten project delivery time. It helps you reduce costs and makes you more competitive. And it gives the customer the confidence that you know what you're talking about. You have a story around how you're going to take them from A to B safely without blowing up their processes or their business operations. Very important story. But if you're a customer and you're planning this stuff, get it into your RFP. Get comments and statements that are relevant to scanning, cleansing, rationalizing the configuration and the business processes down on paper now before you go out and start going to tender on these solutions. I can tell you it will pay dividends on the other end for you. So that's pretty much my presentation, but I am a big fan of Steve Jobs, as you might know. This is my other attempt at a little bit of mirth in the presentation. But there is just one more thing I wanted to talk about on this session today. And it won't take very long, maybe another 5 minutes. But this is about translation. Taking legacy UC and CX configuration that exists in your legacy systems today and transforming them into useful configuration that can be used in your new target UC and CX solution platform. So a little bit of salesman hat on at the moment for Blackchair. Blackchair uses proprietary software that we built ourselves to take configuration that exists from either a data source, doesn't necessarily have to be from a UC and CX legacy system, and can translate those particular configuration objects into similar objects that are compatible with another UC and CX platform. It translates them and puts them into our automation package environment, ready to be reviewed and modified, or ultimately published into the target systems for testing. So there are some inherent benefits to that capability in having that in your business. The first one is a time and reduction savings around the work effort relating to that sort of work. As I say here, avoiding the act of invention. You no longer have to start from scratch in being able to build up from ground zero what a particular routing plan looks like, or what a particular base of agents or skills or skill groups looks like. You can basically run a program to be able to populate that information, and it's persistent. It means that the call center that's already in place on the legacy system doesn't have to freeze and stop what they're doing in terms of changing things in order to support the project and keeping up. This is information that can be quickly and simply moved from A to B in rapid succession. It reduces the time to value on any project delivery. It also reduces the risk and saves work effort on the other end in terms of manually managing that work. Very high-level use cases that this can be applied to. UC and CX migrations, another very powerful use case to help businesses move information from A to B. But also when you're looking at staff provisioning, very complex information coming from, say, an HR system or an Active Directory, and you need to populate that into maybe 2 or 3 different systems to be able to run the call center effectively. Being able to translate that information and populate it into the relevant systems is a very powerful proposition. Another salesman positioning story here. Blackchair is a solution that can kind of walk you through this entire journey. So you can see that we can build and understand the CX cleansing activity, get you to a point of understanding what's important in your business, but then also help you with the execution and the translation, and ultimately helping you move into your target destination, all with a simpler work effort, lower cost, and shortening the time to value throughout this particular cycle. And of course, if any of this is of interest to you, please reach out to us so that we can talk to you a little bit further and give you more in-depth information about what this capability can do. This is a simple screenshot of what the actual user interface looks like to be able to conduct those translations. So each one of these objects here is a particular configuration item that resides in a legacy system. And by simply creating links and maps and conversion activities across each of the different sub-objects, we can then create destination configuration items that reside in our automation package environment, ready for you or your provider or your engineers to examine, check, publish, test, roll back, move forward again, reconfigure, and this can be done at a rate of knots, significantly faster. It's like drinking from a fire hose. It's a much faster throughput than if you were to try to do this sort of work manually. And so that was the just one more thing I wanted to talk to you about. At this point, I'm going to say, oh, I had one last slide. Oops. Oh, well, there you go. So who needs this? Yeah. If you're considering embarking on a new UC-CX solution, have a talk with us. Just get to learn a little bit about what this capability can do and whether it might fit into your overall project plan. Very high profile project. Maybe you're very risk averse. Budgets are very tight. You need to keep an eye on making sure this is done correctly. We can help you. If you want to maintain the status quo regarding your current operational model, come and talk to us because we can help. That translation service works very well in that sort of space. And if you need to help make sure that this project delivers quickly, extracting the value as quickly as possible. And now I will say thank you very much for your time. If there are any questions and Q&As, I'm going to have a quick look at the screen now. So I had one about looking at the impact of skill changes. Yep. And Neris is saying, yes, these configuration changes in the overview. Yes. Yes, I agree with you as well. This particular customer in question had a very complex environment, but this tells us that this is not uncommon in the market. So we're quite confident that we will find those sorts of things coming through in the industry as we conduct these exercises. So there's money to be saved at every exercise that we can do. It's now 40 minutes past. So at this point, I'm going to thank everybody for their attention and their time. I'm going to close down the session now. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm glad that you were able to join us today. We'll please be in touch. Please make sure that you're on the marketing list so that we can send you another bulletin about our next webinar. And we hope you have a wonderful and very safe remainder of the day. Goodbye, everyone.